What is the creepiest real-life story you know that still sends chills down your spine? Was about 7 or 8 years old and went with my family to this man-made lake, Family Park Place in South Georgia. Basically a big, dug-out pond that the owner put a bunch of beach sand and palm trees around and charged admission for people to come, park their cars, grill, and swim for the day. Also had a big, unsafe-as-hell waterside that kids got hurt on. So where my family would park was in front of this little island that was a clump of sand about 30 yards off the shoreline. I was not the best swimmer, but the depth was just above my head, so I could bob up and down and bounce out to this island. Bouncing out to that little island one day we were there. My foot came down onto what felt like a face, felt what was a nose on my toe. The thing I remember is the feeling of hair flowing between my toes. That feeling of fine hair waving in water. I freaked out and for the longest time just sat on the shore. Was a little kid and did not think of anything about it. I can still remember the scared parents going around yelling this kid's name, asking if anyone had seen this little boy. They pulled his body from under the water right in front of that island. I'm 47 now and can still remember the feeling of that hair between my toes. Middle-aged woman in North Carolina was haunted by a fleeting memory of seeing her father's face in the farm privy when she was a child. Her father had abandoned the family when she was like 5, and her therapist recommended hypnotic regression as a way to work this out. A few other memories floated up, including coming into the kitchen and seeing her mother mopping up blood, who yelled at her to go back to bed. Her mom still lived on the family farm, and after a few more details turned up, the local sheriff got a warrant to dig where the old privy had stood. Yep, Dad was still in there, cut up presumably to fit down the hole. This was pre-internet, but developed in real time in the local paper. And right about when the DA was deciding whether to go forward with the case, the 70-something-year-old mom drove out to the North 40 with a pistol. This is all from memory. Love to know if I'm remembering this correctly. My mother worked in a prison with the VP wing. When I was younger, she worked in the education department rather than as a guard. I remember her stopping my sister and I from having our hair in ponytails for a while, making us wear it down, and never really got why. As a tomboy, I hated it, so she let me have it cut, and that was that. When I was older, she explained that a new inmate was in for violating his 5-year-old daughter with a beer bottle, which broke. He let her bleed out and then rolled her into a carpet and put her in the attic. He was discovered trying to move the body. He liked to talk about his girl sometimes, how pretty she was, and how he loved the back of her neck. How little girls with their hair up was what turned him on, how delicate it was, how he could grab it, etc. She couldn't cope seeing us with our hair like that. This girl I knew wasn't answering her phone when I was calling or texting. Finally she does, and is said she is locked in some guy's dorm room in UMBC. I get on the phone with the guy and we start arguing. I say I'm on my to deal with it, and when I get to campus she tells me she got out and I pick her up. I want to confront him and she says no, that he seems really creepy. So fast forward a couple days later and this guy finds my AOL Messenger, yes, AIM, and is threatening me and showing me he knows my whole legal name and address. But also, like, this was 2005, so stuff like that wasn't as easy to find on the internet. He threatens to kill me and the girl, and I called his bluff and let him know I'd be ready to meet up with him anytime because I figured he was a keyboard warrior. A few weeks later, he went on a date with someone from MySpace and brutally killed and raped her. He mutilated her body so it would be hard to identify her. He ended up pleading guilty to spare himself the death penalty. John Gaumer is his name, and they called him the MySpace Killer. A friend of mine in high school was murdered by someone with their car. He was walking home wasted after a party, The autopsy showed injuries that were consistent with the car slowly crushing him, like they were driving under 10 miles per hour. The autopsy also showed he was run over twice, just as slowly. It didn't kill him instantly. He crawled to the side of the road and probably lived for hours in excruciating pain. Not only did they never find out who did it, they never had a single suspect. It happened deep in his neighborhood, so it's not likely that it was some stranger from the highway. So whoever did it could be a neighbor that's still living there. My grandparents are Dutch immigrants in New Zealand, and in the 1970s, they had a caravan that they took out camping to a rural part of the North Island for a little family fun. Camping trip my mom and siblings would have been 10 or younger at the time. They were way out in the middle of nowhere near a lake in the rainforest. And after the kids had gone to sleep, my grandparents had stayed awake a little while just reading, etc., having a cup of tea. They started hearing strange noises, like footsteps outside and twigs breaking. Maybe a hushed voice, but thought they were going paranoid. They were getting a bit freaked out at this point, but assumed it was nothing and they'd be safe. Grandpa told me he couldn't go to sleep and suddenly heard a definite footstep right outside the caravan door. He peeked out the window of the caravan and it was completely pitch black and no moonlight whatsoever. But he could see the glowing cigarette of what must have been a pretty tall man standing right at the door of the caravan. He could still hear other footsteps too, even though whoever was smoking this cigarette outside the door was standing dead still. He told me he'd never been so scared in his life. But he had to do something because he had his wife and 4 little kids sleeping inside the caravan. And so he grabbed his butcher's knife. He was a butcher by profession. Lord knows why he had it on a family camping trip. Opened the door to confront or yell or do whatever he could to scare the people away. But when he opened the door, he saw no one and heard no noise. He thought he was going crazy, but he saw the cigarette butt on the ground outside the door, freshly finished. He got into the car straight away. He had everything ready to go, luckily cause he'd already planned on beginning driving early the next morning anyways, and drove everyone away and found somewhere else near a town to stay instead. That story freaks me out every time I think about it. I was 16 at the time and I had barely just got my license. I had a friend in school, a girl who most considered boy crazy, but to my disappointment, she wasn't interested in me. Typical popular good-looking girl who was into jocks, and I was the nerdiest kid in the class, but we were very close and she would tell me all her struggles and then delete the messages. Mostly because the guys she liked were very possessive. In the dead of night in the winter, I got a call from her. This was very unusual. Mostly the calling, but also it was a school night, and it was very late. She was speaking in a hushed, shaking voice and asked me to come pick her up. I knew something was wrong, but she had to hang up after giving me the address. This was before GPS, and I barely knew how to get to school, but I printed out a MapQuest route to her boyfriend's house in a different city. She asked me to bring her clothes, specifically shirt, underwear, and some sweats. I pushed my car out of the driveway and coasted until I was sure my parents couldn't hear it. I got to the house and she came out, obviously trying to make as little noise as possible. She was naked, makeup smeared from crying. Hair matted. She got in the car, told me to take off, and she put the clothes on. I asked her what happened, and all she could say without breaking down is she went to her BFF's birthday party and woke up like this with no memory. She woke up in the middle of the room with all his friends and him also naked. I took her home and snuck back into the house 2 hours before I had to get up for school. We never spoke of it again. I didn't think much of it then, but 17 years later, I have my own kids and a daughter, who's the light of my world, and I can't tell this story without crying. She's been married, now with kids, to a seemingly good guy for a decade. We don't talk anymore, but I still check her Facebook from time to time, and I hope she's okay now. In my own personal life, my childhood best friend's alcoholic grandpa killed and dismembered his also alcoholic girlfriend. I heard she was missing for around a year, but her family was used to her disappearing like that due to her addictions, so nobody reported her missing. Well, Grandpa died, and my childhood friend was supposed to get his car that was parked about a block away from his house, but her aunt claimed it instead, and my friend was pissed and decided to call and get the car towed, being petty, so her aunt wouldn't be able to get the car out without going through a lengthy process since the car was in the grandpa's name still. One of the dudes working at the tow company was friends with the aunt and knew her dad had died. It was his car, so he called her to give her a chance to get the car first. She went to pick it up and noticed 2 or 3 totes in the back seat, and for whatever reason, she started opening them up right there and saw they were full of different-sized vacuum-sealed bags. She couldn't tell what was in the bags. BC, they were made with that material that gives like a frosted look, and could only tell that whatever was in them was all a dark color. She decided to open one of the bags and was immediately hit with an extremely foul odor, and at first, she thought it was deer meat or something that had gone bad, but when she finally actually looked inside the bag, it was a human hand. She ended up calling the cops, and they took all the totes away and the car, so the aunt or my friend didn't even end up with it, and nothing was ever said. Done. BC, the dude was dead. The same childhood friend of mine ended up being involved with a murder herself some YRS later. She had gotten addicted to meth and one night was with 2 other addicts who were a couple. My friend was driving, girlfriend was in passenger, and the boyfriend in the back. They decided they needed to rob somebody so they could get high, and when they pulled up, the dude hopped in the back seat and pretty much immediately the boyfriend tried to rob him, but the dude pulled out a gun and shot the guy in the head, then ran. My friend and the girlfriend then drove to the hospital, and instead of getting help, they just pushed him out of the car and fled. It took the cops a few months to figure out who both the women were, but they eventually found out, and both were sentenced to prison. My friend did like 5 to 7 years and has been out for a few YRS now. To stories. I used to ride my bike to the other side of my neighborhood to play with my buddy Blake. One day I was riding down the hill towards his house, and he jumped out from behind a power pole and startled me enough that I lost control of my bike and crashed on the street, leaving my forearms skinned about 6 inches each. He kind of blamed me, and I didn't really think anything of it, thinking he was somehow right. Later on, he had gotten some firecrackers and 80s, and we played with them, blew up a model jet and stuff. He mentioned something about using them to blow up frogs, and I didn't take him seriously. He ended up joining the USMC, but didn't re-enlist. I didn't think much more about him. Then one day my mom is reading the paper and asked me what my friend's name was because Suckinsick. Blakely Suckinsick was arrested for the murder of his estranged girlfriend and her unborn child. He had driven her car off the highway onto a dirt road, slit her throat, and had containers of fuel in the car that he set on fire to hide the evidence. I don't remember the particulars of his arrest, but apparently he was walking along the road away from the site when a police officer stopped and questioned him. I don't know if he confessed then or under interrogation, but he confessed. He was convicted of double murder. My good friend as a kid turned out to be a murderer, and I saw the signs but didn't know it at the time. Too. I was stationed in Iwakuni, Japan, and was the safety NCO for our unit. I was passing friends with a guy in embarkation, and one Thursday we went out drinking as a group. Saturday, the guy and 2 buddies decided to rent a canoe and went out into the ocean for some fun. At some point, the boat capsized and the 3 men were stuck holding onto the overturned craft and decided that the strongest swimmer should try to swim to shore to get help, and the other 2 were going to stay put until help arrived. The swimmer got to shore and a second guy had abandoned the canoe and was picked up by fishermen alive. My passing friend didn't make it. He was found after a manhunt down the coast. He had died of hypothermia. This was maybe May, and I seem to remember the water was in the 60s degrees Fahrenheit. Since I was the safety NCO, I had to fill out the paperwork for his death. I learned that even in 70 water, you can die of hypothermia in just a few hours. This event, along with unrelated nightmares I had as a child of being in open water with giant shapeless creatures coming to get me, and I would wake up as jaws were closing around me, gave me thalassophobia, fear of open water, so I had to fill out the incident report for the death of a guy I had been out drinking with just 2 days prior. A woman who worked in a federal government lab and was employed by CSIS Canadian Security Intelligence Service became violently ill while at work. She was transported to a hospital by military medical staff. Ambulance at the hospital, she said she had taken something to kill herself, but that it wasn't working as quickly as she thought it would. She admitted it was something from the top secret lab she worked in, but she refused to tell doctors what it was that she'd taken. CSIS staff had been among those that accompanied her to the hospital. Reportedly, this was due to the top secret nature of her work. The CSIS staff told doctors that they were unable to disclose what the woman may have ingested. They admitted lab records would very likely show what she'd ingested. They said national security concerns prohibited them from disclosing any information, and they refused to cooperate with hospital staff. The woman was moved to isolation, and military guards were placed at her room. Neither her parents or husband were allowed to enter her room. It took several hours for her to die. She never identified what she'd ingested, saying only that no one else would be harmed by what she'd done. I did not know this woman, but my colleague was a friend of hers from uni. Her husband had called him asking for legal help. He wanted to compel the hospital and government to allow him to see his wife. My colleague had no expertise in this area and referred him to someone else. It's my understanding that neither the husband or his in-laws were ever permitted to see her. Reportedly, her body was claimed by the government and she was cremated at an unknown government facility. The ashes were never returned to the family, and the family never learned what was done with her remains. IIRC. This happened in about 1987. I know it all sounds far-fetched, but I was there the day my colleague got the call from the husband. He was very upset by the call and was shocked that she'd done this. He said she was the most stable, law-abiding, ethical person he'd ever known. He seemed equally shocked about the suicide attempt and by her breach of lab and security protocols. He said the woman he'd gone to uni with would never break a rule deliberately, much less steal and ingest an unknown substance. A long waistline ago, mid-90s, I was a countryside ranger on the West Coast, and one day I was carrying out a Phase 1 habit survey when I came across a camp set up in remote, unmanaged woods. Tent, stove, kettle, sleeping bag in tent, some cooking equipment, rucksack, and a pair of walking boots at the tent entrance with a sock in each boot. The problem was it had been there for years. The tent was ripped and weathered, pots full of pine needles, and moss has covered most of the equipment. The rucksack and a couple items of clothing in it, and strangely, a flute. Nothing in the rucksack and anything to ID anyone. We carried out a search of the area with police, dogs, locals, and mountain rescue. Weeks later, not a thing, nothing, absolutely no trace of anything or anyone. We'll never know what happened to that person that felt compelled to leave their camp and leave their flute behind. The case of Lacey Fletcher. Her parents, 66 years old, found their 36-year-old daughter dead on the couch. Lacey had severe agoraphobia and couldn't leave her couch for 12 years, so since she was 24, her parents neglected her severely, didn't take care of her, and didn't get her help. When she was found, she had melted into the couch and her skin had atrophied to the couch leather while she was alive. She was covered in excrement and insects were eating away at her body also while she was alive. Lacey tried to save herself by eating her own excrement and the couch foam. But she was unable to get up from the couch for 12 years, and her parents refused to take care of her, which eventually led to her death. So Lacey Fletcher died from severe neglect from her own parents. When I was 13, the older boys my bestie and I had become friends with used to take us out on forested, unpaved road we lived in the suburbs and tell us that if we kept driving, we'd end up going through a Ku Klux Klan camp. They would tell us that we'd prob be okay because we're white, but if we kept driving further, we'd end up at some biker place, and that's somewhere we should never go alone, ever. Bad things happened to girls there, really bad things. We thought they were just trying to scare us, but there was a seriousness in one of the guys' voices that made me think he was telling the truth. They called it Piggy's Palace. Fast forward 30 years, and that spot was found to be where a serial killer had been feeding his victims to the pigs on his farm. Robert Pickton was one of a few brothers, and most likely the patsy for many deaths. But he loved to torture any women who were left behind, passed out, passed around, drugged up, etc. He was also sent to downtown Vancouver to bring women back to the farm for others and for himself.